And welcome to Showbiz Chicago, the podcast. I have one of my favorite people with me today. Known her for many a year, and she is a beacon to the community and somebody that we could not succeed with. Her name's Tracy Baim, of course, Windy City Times founder, publisher, editor-in-chief, who is the producer of Scrooge and Marley, a fabulous new Christmas film, which is a gay version, a gay take on Dickens' famous Christmas Carol, which I got to see the picture yesterday and stars many of Chicago's brightest actors, and also has appearances with Bruce Vilanch and Tim Kazurinsky. So welcome to the podcast for the first time, Tracy.
Thanks very much for having me.
So how did this concept come to you, Miss Baim?
Well, a man named Richard Knight has written for Windy City Times for several years, and he brought me this script about a little over a year ago, that he had written with Ellen Stokes and Timothy Imsey. By that point, had passed away. And I was kind of hesitant to do a second film after Hannah Free I did it a couple of years prior to that. But I really loved this script, so I brought my friend David Strepp again, and we decided we would produce together, and that would share the burden of the fundraising and organizing of it. And it kind of just flew really quickly from there to 1 year later, we were able to premiere at Music Box.
Which is a fantastic venue for this picture. So what has Hannah Free taught you as a producer that you got to use in Scrooge and Marley?
Well, I definitely learned a lot about, it was a very mystery process for me when I first did Hannah Free as my first feature film as a producer, and I definitely learned a lot about project management and kind of how much you're in for the long haul, both during the filming and then forever after. I mean, I'm still dealing with Hannah Free in terms of paperwork every few months for the investors and DVD sales and all that kind of stuff. For Scrooge and Marley, it was even a more accelerated timeline, and we're doing our own distribution on it for now. So because it was a holiday film, we had to get everything out at once. So it was a much more compressed time frame to get the DVD, the soundtrack, the Blu-ray, everything out at the same time. We're doing 20 cities theatrically in December. So it really was a much crazier post-production schedule.
Sure.
But the filming was very similar itself. One film took 3 weeks, and Scrooge and Marley we did in 12 days.
Wow, that's crazy, Tracy. That is crazy.
Yeah, pretty much it's crazy. Yes, I absolutely have to agree that it's crazy to try to do a feature film in 12 days. We had a miracle. We had a miracle of Christmas happen for us.
It sure did. Well, it's a fantastic film. And I guess what struck me most about the film, Tracy, is first of all, the acting is fantastic in it. And these actors have such, everything about acting is getting across the truth. It's always about the truth. And there's such an underlying commonality with all these actors portraying iconic characters, really. But the through line and just the way it's adapted to, a very gay lesbian version of it, the truth is still about respect and love. And I love how Scrooge has such a backstory, because now people are able to connect with Scrooge the way they never were in prior, incarnations of the project. You now know why Scrooge ends up the way he is. And I think that's, more than any other production, Tracy, I think your film really makes Scrooge, it humanizes him.
Right, I think a lot of, especially, I'm 49 years old, and I think a lot of people in my generation in particular and older will really relate to this, and hopefully younger generations will learn from it, because in our tale, Scrooge lives through the 1970s as a young gay man being kicked out by his family. He lives through the AIDS crisis and suffers losses there. He has personal losses in his family, and of course he's ostracized by his father. So there are so many people who can relate to that on a lot of different levels. There were a lot of emotions. One of the events this weekend was for the Chicago Men's Chorus, and I could tell, it really resonated for a lot of the men of that generation, how much this reflected their stories, and for the first time seeing themselves on screen that way.
Right. And how has that been, Tracy? So you're so deeply involved with the project. But once you see it on the big screen and see an audience's reaction to it, how has that affected you?
Well, it's, putting out a creative project like that is so different than doing Monday City Times every week for 27 years. You get criticism for news articles and things like that, but it's not very personal. Putting a creative effort out there is very different, and even though I'm on the business side, I certainly worry about the creative reception of the film because they both are connected. So to see it at the Music Box Theater, which is known as such a home for Christmas movies, with a nearly sold-out crowd that was clapping and applauding throughout the whole movie on songs and then the credits and everything, it was really almost a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a producer to see. It also was a great relief because, we still have a lot of money to raise in our post-production costs, and knowing that there is at least some part of the community, day and straight, that loves this film means that we should be able to recoup our expenses over the coming weeks and months or years.
Talk a little bit, Tracy, about the soundtrack for the movie, because the music is absolutely brilliant. I know there's a piece by called "Amazing" that Jason Gould sings, but really you have a lot of local Chicago performers that are on the soundtrack, which is it's standalone besides the movie.
Yeah, I absolutely love the soundtrack, and Richard Knight, who was the co-director, co-writer, he coordinated the music for the movie, both the music that's seen in the movie as well as the background music, and then pulled together what 20 pieces that he wanted on the soundtrack, and it was a parallel rolling process because I didn't even realize when I got involved how much music was integral to the film. So it really complicated both our film production as well as our post-production, doing the soundtrack at the same time we were doing the DVD, but I am so happy that we put that extra effort into it because I do feel the soundtrack stands alone. It is incredible. We have Becca Kaufman from Chicago, Gina Piana, and a whole range of Chicagoans added to Matt Albert, Betty, and Jason Gould on the national level. Linda Good and Jen Zayas, the Showbiz kids, Chicago Game and Sports. Really, I've listened to that CD almost 100 times now, and I just can't get enough of it. And even if I hadn't seen the movie, the soundtrack is really incredible. It's not a typical soundtrack, meaning there's no dialogue on it. It's not really it's all music. So people won't necessarily, they'll need to see both, I guess, would be the thing to say, because the soundtrack is basically music, and this movie is film that has music in it.
So talk a little bit, Tracy, about people that want to get into the business and want to start producing film. Talk a little bit about independent movie producing and what that entails, especially when it comes to marketing and distribution, because so much of that has changed just in the last 5 years. But talk a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't go to film school, so I don't have the background in film that a lot of people doing these days have. But what I do have is, what I feel like anyway, is being an entrepreneur, business owner with City Times, I have the ability to juggle a lot and make connections with people that might be interested in a project. I feel a lot of, I know there's not a lack of, there's a tremendous number of scripts out there and very talented writers, directors, and actors, right? So we know that's a given, that there are so many projects that could be done in Chicago and nationally. What's lacking is, of course, the money. And so the producers are the ones that are, I think, the most rare in independent cinema, because the economics of it are difficult to predict. We capped our investors at $100,000. We did not raise any more than $100,000 from investors that will get take back. The other $100,000 we need to raise was from individual donors or merchandise sales. Hannah Free was double that in terms of investors, and it's a long road to get that money back, and most independent movies, a lot of them never get the full return back. So we try to keep our budget as low as possible and still do a quality product. But that's a really complicated scenario because so many things predictably and unpredictably go wrong. You just know you're going to end up spending more money, and in post we had lots of things we had to do to increase the quality of the film, and there were lots of special effects. So really, I would say it's about project management, but it's also really about respecting the money and understanding that your primary goal as a producer is to return the money to the investors. However you can do that, even if it takes you 5 years, because those people then might believe in your next project, or new people might believe in your next project. Huh. So in terms of Scrooge and Marley, with Hannah Free, we did have a distributor, Wolf Video, with Scrooge and Marley, we decided, because we had such an accelerated timeline with the holidays, to self-distribute. We did pitch it to a few larger companies in September, but it was really just too late for their holiday schedule. And it was for them too niche of a film, a Christmas Day film. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Right. So instead, we decided to parallel distribute it theatrically, some festivals, and on DVD, soundtrack, and Blu-ray. So it was a really quick timeline to do that. I think most people would be crazy to think they could shoot in May and have all of those things done by December, but somehow we managed to do it. Worst case for us would have been we would have held it and distributed it next year, but I wanted to really be able to start getting revenue to pay the bills this year, so that's why we really pushed hard to get it out this year. So I think for producers, I mean, there are definitely resources and books and courses people can take for at least the basics of creating a business plan and learning, but for me, I learned the most on the job as is the case. So if there's a way to be an assistant producer somewhere, that probably would have been smart for me to do. Producer. But for someone else, I would say that would be an ideal situation, because really, it's not a glamorous job. It's about making sure that the crew is fed and paid, and all your SAG rules are followed. And it's a lot of work, but it's not brain surgery. It's just a lot of work, and you have to be prepared to do it.
Wow. So on a personal note, Tracy, I mean, I've known you for many years. You've been such a leader in the community. What is the biggest change that you've seen in our community since you started Windy City Times, for the good and for the bad?
Well, this year, I started in 1984 at Gay Life newspaper, and then I was a co-founder of Windy City Times in 1985 at age 22. And those years in Chicago were really like being in the middle of a war zone in terms of the AIDS crisis and its impact. So I as a 22-year-old coming into the community and covering funerals and the last days of the lives of so many people, it was really an honor to be able to meet so many people who fought that battle so courageously and lost, and some who won. So I feel like the 1980s and still mid-1990s, that was the priority, the most important thing facing the community. Unfortunately, a lot of people forget that it's still as prevalent as it was then, but not as many people know people who were affected by it. And so AIDS to me is just as important, but unfortunately it's far off the radar of the gay community. I hope that doesn't mean the resurgence will kind of overtake us again. So that's one thing that's different from the first era that I covered. The other part of it is there are just so many more out LGBT people. I don't think there's more LGBTs, I just think there are more out people, which means that there are tens of thousands of people in the Chicago area that are doing work as openly LGBT people. That may be in a mainstream corporate job or in a government job or whatever it might be, but that is, to me, always been the goal, to demystify who we are. And in part, I feel like a movie like Scrooge and Marley or Hannah 3, that's what the goal is, right, to show the complexity of our lives on the screen. As a journalist, I can do that in a 500-word story, but a movie can do that in so many more ways, is to show, yeah, we have some mean jerks in our community, like a Scrooge, we also some fabulous lesbian cabaret singers, and all sorts of people that don't get represented when you see, us on TV. We're mostly, seen as a certain kind of gay person. In newspapers and our gay films, we just can show a much more complex community. So that, to me, again, is one of the big differences, is how many more out people there are. And you can't put that genie back in the bottle. We are progressing forward at such an accelerated rate on gay rights. No other community has ever moved as quickly toward their rights as our community, and that is in thanks to the African American Civil Rights Movement, the women's movement, and other movements before us, that we were able to take, ride on the tails of their successes and create this momentum that has moved us so quickly forward.
Wow. And how has your newspaper changed, Tracy, even in the last 10 years with the whole social media marketing and online, things that are going on? How have you kept the paper focused?
Well, what's interesting is, since Windy City Times has always been a free paper, when the internet came along in the mid-90s, we were not free at all. We went online very aggressively, very quickly. So our archives go back to the mid-1990s. On our website, you can find pieces way back when. And so to me, what the internet does is allow us much more freedom to cover the gay community in larger ways. we can have a 32 or 40-page print paper each week, but online we can have so much more content. So we've adapted and adjusted that way. We have, our papers available on the iPad and the iPhone and all sorts of different ways, but our core is still the print newspaper.
Sure.
That is what pays the bills. That is what, really allows us to do all the other stuff online and events and all that. It's because we still have a weekly newspaper. And we feel very fortunate. My new book just came out called Defense, Gay Power. It's a whole history of the gay newspaper movement in America and how, really, at this point in history, if you look at the number of weekly and bi-weekly gay newspapers, we're actually back to the 1970s levels of gay press. We have lost so many of the important gay and lesbian newspapers over the last decade that I'm a little worried that our history and legacy are being lost. Because blogs come and go. They aren't usually archived by museums. They're not usually searchable 10 years from when they close. And we're losing that frontline documentation of our history to more newspapers that close. So the book kind of looks at that history of gay media and gave me a new perspective, I think, on how important the City Times is, to the historians 20 years from now that are going to look back at what happened in our movement today.
Absolutely. And can you give everybody, we're going to put a link up on the screen, but you can get all the merchandise and everything online for Scrooge and Marley in order and find out when screenings are, because screenings are going on across the country, and it's also coming back.
Yeah, we're really excited. We have a few more dates at Newsbox, and then Chiefsville Film Center is right around the Christmas holiday, and then we're at the Castro Theater in San Francisco, we're in New York.
Wow.
We're in about 15 more cities throughout this month, and then we are, as of today, available on Amazon for the soundtrack and the DVD, and the Blu-ray will be available next week. So they can get everything through our website, ScroogeandMarleyMovie.com.
Fantastic. And you were also saying yesterday, Tracy, at the screening, that people can host screening parties at their house.
Right, they can host screening parties at their house, and there's also this very unique thing called TUG, T-U-G-G. It's a new website where people can host screenings of new and classic movies at theaters, mainstream theaters like AMC, across the country. So if you're there's a guy in Orlando, for example, that's hosting a Scrooge and Marley screening for his friends at a regular theater. As long as they hit the minimum threshold of number of people, the TUG organization will coordinate with the theater to get them the Blu-ray, and the movie will play. So it's a very unique new concept, I think, through social media where people can have their friends in a mainstream theater. But if they're interested in doing a house party, they can do so as well. A lot of the screenings are benefiting LGBT nonprofits. We had a Peace House screening last Saturday that was a benefit for a senior gay organization in Boston. So if people are interested for nonprofits to use it as a benefit, they can contact us through the website.
Fantastic. And if people want to get a copy of your new book, how do they do that?
It's also just available on Amazon today. It's available black and white and color editions. Black and white's $25. Unfortunately, the color has to be $89 because of color printing. But it's an excellent copy in both versions. And it's also both the soundtrack, the CD, and my book are available at Women and Children First Bookstore in Chicago.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations, Tracy. You are my favorite people in the world. I adore you. And our community owes a great deal of its survival to you.
Thank you so much for your help.
Okay, bye-bye, Tracy.
All my life I have been waiting for the courage that you see. Isn't it amazing?